The night was thick with silence, save for the occasional rumble of passing trucks along the dimly lit highway. The street lamps flickered weakly, their glow struggling against a heavy mist that curled across the road. On the shoulder, a sleek black car sat stranded, its hood propped open and steam rising into the air. Beside it stood a woman in a tailored coat. Her phone pressed to her ear as frustration tightened her features. Her calls for assistance went unanswered. The network was poor, and her battery blinked with the last threads of life. From across the street, a man stirred beneath a threadbare blanket. He was slouched against the wall of a closed convenience store, his worldly possessions tucked into a battered backpack. His beard was unkempt and his clothes hung loose, but his eyes, though tired, were sharp, observing the scene. She looked out of place in this part of town, vulnerable even. He hesitated. The world had taught him that people rarely welcomed kindness from men like him. Still, something in his chest nudged him forward. The woman dropped her phone with an exasperated sigh, her heel tapping against the asphalt. She froze when she heard a voice, low but steady. "Engine trouble?" She turned swiftly, eyes narrowing at the figure approaching her. He raised his hands, slightly, a gesture of peace. "Don't mean to startle you," he said, his voice gentle. "Just noticed you've been stuck here a while. Maybe I can help." Her first instinct was caution. A man from the streets, offering to fix a luxury car. It seemed absurd, yet the flickering headlights of passing cars reminded her how dangerous the night could be. Against her better judgment, she nodded faintly. He approached the hood, his hands moving with surprising familiarity over machinery. "Looks like your radiator's overheated," he murmured, more to himself than her. "Happens when the coolant's low. You're lucky it didn't ruin the engine." She blinked. His knowledge was unexpected, his movements confident. "You know about cars?" A faint smile touched his lips. Used to work in a garage before, he trailed off, his eyes clouding for a moment before returning to the task. "Got some water?" She hurried to fetch a bottle from the back seat, watching as he carefully poured it into the reservoir. He moved with care, not wasting a drop, as though each ounce mattered. Minutes later, the steam subsided, and the car seemed calmer, almost grateful. "Give it a try," he said, stepping back. She slipped into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared back to life. Relief swept through her, and she looked up at him through the windshield, astonished. You fixed it," she breathed, stepping out again. "I don't even know your name." "Daniel," he said simply, wiping his hands on his worn trousers. "Glad I could help." There was no boast in his voice, no expectation. He turned as if to leave, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. "Wait," she called after him. "At least let me thank you. Something, anything." He shook his head. "No need. You were stuck. I just did what anyone should." But the way he said it, the quiet dignity, the calm in his tone, made her chest tighten. Few men with riches spoke so humbly, so selflessly. And she, Clara Montgomery, one of the wealthiest women in the city, found herself staring at a man society had forgotten, yet who carried himself with more grace than those in her glittering circles. The mist thickened, and the highway grew lonelier, but Clara felt a spark of something new, a story unfolding that was far from ordinary. Daniel walked away, unaware that the woman he had just helped was not merely grateful, but deeply intrigued. And even more unaware, his single act of kindness had already begun to weave the threads of destiny that would soon change his life forever. Clara stood for a moment, the hum of her engine steady behind her, yet her gaze fixed on Daniel's retreating figure. He moved with a slow, deliberate stride, carrying the weight of a life that the world had refused to see. She had met countless men in gleaming suits, those who prided themselves on charm and fortune, but none had struck her quite like this stranger who asked for nothing after giving so much. She gripped the doorframe, torn between leaving as expected or doing something wildly unusual. Following him, with a sudden determination, she locked her car and crossed the street, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Daniel," she called out. He paused, turning with a guarded expression. His eyes, though tired, softened slightly at the sight of her hurrying over. "Something wrong with the car again?" "No," she said, catching her breath. "It's fine now. I I can't let you walk away like this. You helped me when you didn't have to. Where do you live? The question seemed to wound him. He lowered his gaze, his voice flat. Nowhere. Anywhere. Depends on the night. Clara's heart tightened. He didn't say it with self-pity, only as a statement of fact. She stepped closer. Then at least let me buy you something to eat. There's a diner not far from here. He hesitated, suspicion flickering across his features. He was used to rejection, not invitations. You don't need to do that. I know I don't, she replied firmly. But I want to. For a long beat, they stood beneath the weak glow of a flickering streetlight, the mist curling around them like a curtain hiding them from the world. Finally, Daniel nodded. All right. They walked in silence toward the diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly in the distance. Clara stole glances at him as they walked. His coat was worn thin, the soles of his shoes nearly gone, yet he carried himself with a quiet steadiness. She wondered what life had stolen from him, what story lay buried beneath the lines on his face. Inside, the warmth of the diner enveloped them. The scent of coffee and fried food filled the air. A waitress, surprised to see Clara in such a place, led them to a booth by the window. Clara slid in gracefully, while Daniel sat stiffly across from her, clearly out of place. Order anything you like, Clara encouraged. He scanned the menu quickly, his eyes darting away. A coffee's fine. She frowned. Coffee won't fill you up. Try something hearty. Please. After a pause, he sighed and pointed to the simplest dish, a plate of eggs and toast. Clara, meanwhile, ordered a full meal, as if to balance the quiet restraint he carried. When the waitress left, silence fell between them. Clara studied him carefully. You said you worked in a garage before. What happened? Daniel traced a finger along the edge of the table, his eyes distant. Life happened. My father owned the place. Small, nothing fancy, but it kept us fed. When he passed, debts piled up. I tried to keep it running, but the bank took it. After that, one thing after another. He shrugged. The streets don't wait for explanations. Clara felt a pang of guilt, thinking of the empires her family controlled, the way money moved mountains for them, while men like Daniel were crushed by the smallest misfortunes. You didn't deserve that, she said softly. He gave her a faint smile. Deserve's got nothing to do with it. Some people climb, some people fall. All you can do is keep walking. Their food arrived, breaking the heaviness of the moment. Daniel ate slowly, each bite measured, while Clara watched, realizing he treated even a simple meal like a gift. The silence between them grew comfortable, a strange bond forming in the most unlikely of places. When they finished, Clara pulled out a sleek black card to pay, but Daniel stopped her with a gentle shake of his head. Let me cover the coffee, at least. She blinked, stunned. Daniel, you don't have... It's not about the money, he interrupted softly. It's about dignity. You asked me to join you, so let me contribute what I can. Her throat tightened, but she nodded, allowing him that pride. He placed a crumpled few dollars on the table, perhaps all he had left, and rose to leave. Clara followed, unsettled by how deeply his quiet strength stirred her. Outside, the mist had thickened into a light drizzle. Daniel pulled his blanket tighter, ready to vanish back into shadows. But Clara couldn't let him go. Not yet. Daniel, she said suddenly, her voice more urgent than she intended. Would you consider working again, if someone gave you the chance? He looked at her strangely, as though trying to decipher her intent. Work? Sure. But people don't hire men who look like me. I don't exactly fit in boardrooms. Clara smiled faintly. Not all work happens in boardrooms. He studied her for a long moment, suspicion warring with a flicker of hope. Why are you doing this? He asked finally. She hesitated. How could she explain? That she was one of the wealthiest women in the country, that her family owned companies across industries, that she could change his life with a single phone call? It felt wrong to reveal it now. He might see it as pity, not genuine care. Because kindness like yours is rare, she said instead, her voice steady. And people who carry it deserve more than the world gives them. His eyes softened, but he only nodded, turning away into the drizzle. Clara watched him go, her heart caught in a strange grip she hadn't known before. She returned to her car, yet the thought of him lingered like a shadow. In the days that followed, Clara found herself restless. Board meetings, charity galas, dinners with dignitaries. All the trappings of her life felt hollow compared to the memory of Daniel's quiet smile, his humble dignity. She instructed her driver to circle the same part of town more than once, hoping to spot him again. Each time she didn't, a pang of disappointment followed. One evening, after a particularly tedious meeting, she told her assistant she needed air and dismissed her car. She walked the streets alone, her heels striking the wet pavement, until she reached a familiar convenience store wall. And there, slumped against it, was Daniel, asleep beneath his blanket, the rain dripping onto his shoulders. Clara's chest tightened. She approached quietly, removing her coat and draping it over him. His eyes fluttered open, confusion flashing before recognition softened his features. "You again," he murmured. "Yes," she said gently, kneeling beside him. "I told you I wasn't done thanking you." He chuckled weakly. "You're persistent, I'll give you that." She smiled. "Maybe I am, but persistence has its rewards." This time, she extended her hand, not with money, not with charity, but with a genuine offer. "Come with me, Daniel. Just trust me once more." The drizzle thickened into steady rain, but in that moment, neither noticed. Daniel looked at her hand, at the woman who seemed so out of place yet so determined, and the faintest spark of something unspoken flickered in his chest. He didn't know who she truly was, or what destiny she was about to set in motion, but her eyes carried a promise he couldn't ignore. Slowly, he reached out and took her hand. Rain drummed steadily against the city streets as Clara led Daniel away from the corner where he had grown accustomed to surviving. For him, the world had always been a blur of passing cars, hurried footsteps, and turned-away faces. Yet, as her hand tightened around his, something unfamiliar stirred inside him, an inkling that perhaps the tide of his life had finally shifted. Clara, cloaked not just in her elegant attire, but in an air of undeniable conviction, seemed to embody hope itself. They walked in silence until her car came into view, its sleek frame gleaming beneath the lamplight. Daniel hesitated, his steps faltering as he realized the sharp contrast between her world and his. His shoes were cracked, his coat frayed, and his reflection in the polished windows of her car was a painful reminder of the gulf between them. "I don't belong in that," he murmured. Clara turned to him, her eyes steady. "Daniel, you belong wherever kindness and dignity exist. That means you belong anywhere." Her words, simple yet profound, disarmed the self-doubt he carried. She opened the car door and gestured for him to enter. He did so reluctantly, sinking into the leather seat that smelled faintly of luxury and power. The world outside blurred as the city lights streaked past, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a tomorrow that didn't involve cold pavements and empty stomachs. When they arrived at her estate, Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The wrought iron gates rose high, and the mansion behind them shimmered with light, sprawling across acres of manicured gardens. It was a sight he had only glimpsed in glossy magazines discarded on sidewalks. His chest tightened. "This is where you live?" Clara nodded gently, as though aware of the storm within him. "Yes, and tonight, it's where you'll stay too." Inside, the house was alive with warmth. Marble floors, golden chandeliers, and walls lined with art spoke of a life steeped in wealth. But Clara noticed the way Daniel's eyes roamed, not with envy, but with disbelief, almost discomfort. She guided him to a guest room, where fresh clothes and a steaming meal awaited. "Why are you doing this?" he asked finally, his voice low. Clara took a deep breath. "Because you reminded me of something money can't buy. Humanity. Selflessness. You helped me without knowing who I was, without expecting anything in return. People in my world rarely do that. You gave me something real. Daniel, the least I could do is give you back a piece of what you've lost." For a long time, he stared at her, searching for any trace of pity in her eyes. But all he found was sincerity. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he allowed himself to accept her kindness. He ate. He showered. He slept in a bed softer than any surface he had touched in years. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel dreamed without fear. Days passed, and Clara's determination grew stronger. She offered him work, not as charity, but as opportunity, a position in one of her companies, starting humbly in the maintenance department where his mechanical skills could shine. Daniel accepted cautiously, uncertain of his place but eager to prove himself. His first weeks were filled with doubt. Colleagues eyed him curiously. Some even whispered, wondering why Clara Montgomery, the elusive billionaire, had personally endorsed a man who appeared from the streets. Yet Daniel worked tirelessly, his hands steady, his knowledge sharp. Machines that others deemed beyond repair came back to life beneath his touch. His quiet diligence began to draw respect, first from his peers, then from his superiors. But it was his character that left the deepest mark. He never sought attention, never craved reward. When asked why he worked so hard, his answer was always the same. Because if you're trusted with something, you should honor it. Those words spread quietly through the company halls, until even the board of directors knew the story of the humble mechanic who carried wisdom far greater than his station. Meanwhile, Clara watched his transformation with awe. She had known he was capable, but she hadn't anticipated the ripple effect he would create. Employees who had once been indifferent began to care more deeply about their work. His resilience inspired them. His humility grounded them. And through it all, Clara felt something within herself shifting too. The walls she built around her heart, fortresses forged by years of wealth, expectations, and betrayals, began to crumble. One evening, after a long day, she found Daniel in the gardens of her estate. He stood quietly by the fountain, gazing at the stars. She approached softly, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. "You've changed this place," she said gently. He shook his head. "I haven't changed anything. I just did what I could." She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that people aren't measured by wealth or status, but by the lives they touch. Daniel, you've touched mine more than you'll ever know." His chest tightened, emotions warring within him. For so long, he had been invisible, overlooked, dismissed. And here she was, this woman of immense power, looking at him as though he mattered more than all the riches in her possession. Yet doubts gnawed at him. "Clara, our worlds are too far apart. You live in light. I've spent years in shadows." She smiled softly, reaching for his hand. "Then maybe it's time the light met the shadows. Maybe together we can build something brighter." The sincerity in her voice broke through his walls. For the first time, Daniel allowed himself to believe that he could belong, not just in her world, but by her side. Months turned into a year. Daniel rose to the ranks of Clara's company, his innovations saving millions in costs, his leadership earning admiration. The man who once slept on cold pavements now stood as a symbol of resilience and redemption. Clara, meanwhile, found herself not only a leader of an empire, but a woman in love. Her heart tethered not by wealth or status, but by the quiet strength of the man who had once stopped to help her on a lonely highway. Their story spread quietly at first, whispered among employees, then reported in newspapers. The Billionaire and the Homeless Mechanic became a headline that captured the imagination of thousands. But beyond the headlines and admiration, what truly mattered was a bond between them. Two souls who found in each other what the world had denied them: authenticity, trust, and a love unshaken by circumstance. And perhaps the most extraordinary part was how their union began to ripple outward. Clara and Daniel launched initiatives to support those who, like him, had been forgotten. Shelters were funded, job training programs created, opportunities given to those dismissed as hopeless. Daniel often visited these places himself, sitting with men and women who reminded him of his past, reminding them with quiet conviction: "You are not your circumstances. You are your choices, your kindness, your will to rise." Every time he spoke those words, Clara watched from the sidelines with pride swelling in her chest. She knew then that the night her car broke down had not been an accident. It had been destiny weaving its threads, guiding two strangers into each other's lives for a purpose greater than either could have imagined. Years later, when their love story was told by others, it was often painted as a fairy tale. the billionaire and the homeless man, fate's unlikely match. But to them, it was never about wealth or miracles. It was about a single act of kindness on a misty night, an act that bridged the chasm between two worlds and revealed that the richest treasure of all was not found in mansions or bank accounts, but in the compassion that binds one heart to another. And as they stood side by side, hand in hand, building not just empires but hope, they knew with certainty that their story would outlive them. A living testament that sometimes the smallest gestures create the most magnificent destinies.